Good morning, everyone. The hearing for the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on FY2020 budget and U.S.-Africa relations. So without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and other materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. I recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. I want to thank our witnesses for being here with us today. I also want to thank the State Department and USAID staff, both here in DC and working all across the continent, for your service. During the past year, I have traveled on a number of CODELs, and I'm always impressed by the dedication and work of the staff. The focus of this hearing is on the fiscal year 2020 budget, and I also expect that we will spend some time addressing this administration's policy toward Africa, because as we all know, there is a direct correlation between our budget and our foreign policy priorities. Once again, this administration has proposed significant decreases in the requested budget for Africa. And as usual, Congress has not adopted many of this administration's proposals, and in a bipartisan manner has appropriated aid at higher levels than those requested. U.S. engagement toward Africa is key in critical areas, including trade and investment, and it's time that we transition from aid to Africa to bilaterally trading with partners. The administration has promised to promote economic growth and trade in Africa through Prosper Africa. When I first heard about Prosper Africa, I was interested because I know that trade and investment is ultimately a win-win for the continent and the United States. U.S. business can engage new markets and jobs are created across the continent. But how will Prosper Africa, with a $50 million program budget, help American businesses penetrate African markets? Have staff been hired for the deal teams we heard about? $50 million seems like a very small amount. Are there any success stories that you all can share with members of Congress, and what sectors are gaining the most traction? Finally, where can Congress help fill in the gaps? The African market is simply too big for U.S. businesses not to export goods and services. But for U.S. businesses to be engaged across Africa, they need environments where they can do business. African governments must do their part by reducing trade barriers, having transparent banking procedures and policies, and adhering to agreed-upon business deals and contracts. There must be peace and security, and countries must democratically respect the human rights of their citizens. That is why U.S. policy must always be holistic. But just 2% of the fiscal year 2020 budget request was focused on democracy and governance, 6% on peace and security, 9% on economic growth. It would be incumbent upon us to make sure that the continent, with one of the largest and youngest populations in the world, is fully engaged, live in functioning democracies, and are able to express their civil liberties, especially free speech, freedom of the press, and assembly. We need to continue to provide opportunities for young professionals through the YALI program, but we must also find a way to help African youth develop vocational and technical skills. This will be one of the key ways to ensure that the youth bulge has a positive impact rather than the large numbers of youth being a challenge to African countries. I understand that U.S. policy toward the continent is diverse. I know we train many of the continent's military forces, help reduce infectious disease, and help build communities after devastating floods such as the cyclone in Mozambique this year, among other things. But we must have ambassadors at every U.S. embassy in Africa, and we must have accurate embassy personnel to help fulfill our missions in Africa. While leading a CODEL with members of Congress, we had a chance to see some of the military engagement taking place in Djibouti, Niger, and Burkina Faso. The terrorist threat is real, and we must have to ensure that U.S. policy toward the Sahel is holistic, and we must ensure that embassies have what they need to do their jobs effectively, whether that be funding or staff. That said, it is critical that U.S. policy is continually addressing the root cause of increasing insecurity. We know that oftentimes people turn to violent extremism because of a lack of opportunities, marginalization, or poverty. So I'll be looking to hear about our development programs in this region, as we talked about last week. With that, I look forward to hearing the testimony of our witnesses on the issues I have raised and others such as Ebola containment in the DRC and its border regions, combating the suppression of journalists and citizens who disagree with their governments, or the challenges of young people migrating to urban cities looking for opportunities that may or may not exist. It would be good to hear about U.S. policy towards Sudan and Cameroon. I know my office continues to get a number of calls regarding Cameroon. I'm also hearing a great deal of concern from people about crackdowns on journalists and activists in Nigeria. I also want to hear about the bright spots and our strong partners on the continent. Members of Congress on both sides want to ensure that Africa is not being neglected and appropriate funding is going toward our diplomacy, defense, and development strategy, but also trade and investment in the region. I now recognize the ranking member for the purpose of making his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for calling this important hearing. And I thought our hearing last week on the Sahel was extraordinarily effective, and we welcome back Ms. Anderson for twice within 10 days. So thank you for being here again. And of course, the Honorable Naj, thank you, the Assistant Secretary. Thank you for your tremendous work as well. As we serve our relations with Africa and the alignment of our budget with our priorities, let us first accentuate, I think, some real positive breakthroughs. We provide a tremendous amount of humanitarian assistance and health aid, particularly via PEPFAR, and our combating of HIV/AIDS as well as tuberculosis and malaria. Amazingly, we also appear to be winning the fight against Ebola, the outbreak in eastern DR Congo, and I hope you will spend some time updating the committee on that. We've gotten reviews. I checked the USAID fact sheet, which is constantly being updated. The fact that healthcare workers have been able to get vaccinated against it means that their ability to do their life-saving work is